Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to look into today is the stalking of a woman named Laura Black and the mass murderer Richard Farley. He grew a deadly obsession with Laura, and when she didn't return his feelings, he decided to go on a rampage. I'd just like to let you know that I mean no disrespect to anyone I'm talking about today. I've just gathered this information from the internet and compiled it into a video for educational purposes. So we begin in 1984 when Laura Black, who was 22 years old, had just been offered a job at a company called ESL Incorporated. She goes around for a tour, and this is when she meets a man named Richard Farley. Of course, Laura didn't have a clue how obsessed Richard would actually become with her. So she started a new job, everything went really well, she worked hard, but not long into her job, Richard began leaving gifts at her desk. He would leave baked goods, he would write letters to her, and at first Laura just tried to ignore it. She tried to just maintain a friendly relationship. She wasn't a malicious woman, so she wanted to be nice about it, but she wasn't really interested in it. The thing with Richard, which he would later actually claim, is that he felt like he immediately fell in love with Laura, like love at first sight, I guess, and he stated that he knew that they needed to be together, which of course Laura didn't. Before I go any further, let me just give you some background on Richard, because what happened kind of came out of the blue. And looking back at his actual history, there's no real sign of violence or anything like that. So it's a little bit of an odd case, this. He was born on the 25th of July in 1948 at the Lackland Air Force Base in Ireland, and he was the first out of 6 children that his parents had. Richard's father worked in military, and his mother was a household wife, just a stay-at-home mum, and wife. And his mother went on to state that there is no abuse in his childhood or anything like that, although there is some kind of dispute against that and some mixed views in a sense. But from what I couldn't find anything online to say that he had been abused or anything like that as a child. So take that as you will. He was said to be a well-mannered child who enjoyed playing chess in his spare time. He enjoyed doing things like baking. He was very well behaved and showed no signs of abuse. He went on to enlist in the US Navy, and he graduated first in his class from the Naval Submarine School, but he quickly voluntarily dropped out of that. Then, after basic had finished, he went on to be a crypto logic technician, which is actually someone who works with electronic equipment. So for his job, he had to have this really, really high clearance, because obviously everything was so strict and whatnot. The military would actually check on him, I believe, every 5 years. So they would go around, they would ask people, they would try and find out information about him to make sure that nothing had changed in that time. And nothing ever had. He managed to keep this clearance for the 10 years that he was with the military. There were no problems whatsoever with him, and in 1977, after his discharge, he went on to buy a house, and that is when he began working for ESL, which stands for Electromagnetic Systems Laboratory. And there, he was a really good worker. He was always a top employee, and he, according to everyone, did a really good job. They said that he was a nice guy. He was always concentrating on his work, although sometimes he did come across as arrogant and sometimes would brag about this gun collection that he had, but nobody sort of said anything bad about him apart from those things. So that's just a bit of his history. Let's get back to 1984. And Richard is becoming more and more persistent with Laura. He's asking her out all the time. He's constantly mithering her. He's constantly sending her letters and ringing her on her office phone, obviously. And that was most days he was ringing her on her office phone. Laura went on to join the ESL softball team, and she went out doing matches, of courses, and he was there. He turned up to every single one that she was in, which is weird and creepy. Like, she told him that she wasn't interested, and he just wasn't having any of it. Laura also went to an aerobics class to help with the fitness. She likes to keep herself fit, and he began turning up at those too. Now, those were actually outside of work. The softball team was provided by work, so he could follow her straight out of work, I guess. But this one was actually completely nothing to do with work, completely her outside life, and he was there too. Even though she made it really clear he wouldn't date him, he obviously wasn't going to let it go. Richard was actually 36 years old at the time, and he just began escalating his behaviour towards Laura, who, as I said, was 22. Richard had no previous issues with mental health. He had no criminal record, and as I've told you, up until that point, he'd done nothing concerning whatsoever. Then all of a sudden, Laura starts working at ESL. He sees her. He thinks it's love at first sight. He becomes obsessed with her, and his behavior just totally changes. He was stalking her, and he even went as far as to take some false information to ESL HR, and through that, he actually managed to gain her address and her phone number. So now he knew where she lived, and he had a home phone number too. He would go on to drive by her house several times a day, and once more, he kept on writing her letters. He would do that around 2 times a week at this point. He would then try and make friends with someone from the custodial department. Basically, he was trying to get a hold of Laura's office keys so that he could copy them, and then he would have access to her locked away personal items at any point, and he could just find out more information about her. He just carried on ringing her office, trying to contact Laura however he could. I have seen at some points he did stop with the letters, but then he would just quickly pick that back up again and just resume sending them. In total, Laura would actually receive 200 letters off Richard in the 4 years that he would stalk her for. He just wasn't letting her go. Laura made it clear she didn't want a relationship with him. They never had a relationship. They never had anything together. She never showed any interest in Richard whatsoever. She always politely told him no, and that obviously she was not interested. And yet in his head, I don't know what was going on. He was just obsessed with her, and he just continued to stalk her all the time. Wherever she went, whatever she did, he was there. Laura did everything she could to get away from him. She changed her number, and she actually changed her address between the dates of July 85 and February 88. She moved 3 times. She moved house 3 times to try and get away from Richard so that he didn't know where she lived. And yet he just found her address each and every time, and she just couldn't get away from him. He even went as far as, when she was on vacation, he called her parents up, and it was basically to threaten her and to let her know that he knew where her parents lived. And obviously she was scared. He was becoming increasingly more aggressive with what he was doing, and he was no longer kind of being friendly, but obviously you don't want to be stalked either way, whether it's friendly or not, and normally escalates. So he was no longer sort of doing the friendly bit and being more threatening and more aggressive towards it. And he was just getting more angry at her, because why didn't she love him like he loved her? Finally, in October of 1985, Laura had had enough. She decided that she was going to go to HR in work. Now, she didn't know what else to do. You know, she'd tried a lot of things. She'd done a lot of preventative measures, and yet he still kept finding her and calling her all the time. And it's scary and it's irritating. You just want to get on with your life, and this person just will not leave you alone and will not stop pestering you. And now he's behaving more threatening and more aggressive. So she just didn't know what to do. She goes to HR and she tells them what he's been doing. They conducted an investigation, and they basically told him that he had to attend mandatory psychological counselling sessions, sorry, which Richard did do. He attended them, and for a little while they actually worked. but he quickly just went back to his old ways again and carried on stalking her. That was in December when he started it back up again. So it was, what, 2 months later, if that. HR spoke to him again in December and then again in January of 1986, which in both times he was actually given a warning. This made him really angry, and he went and confronted Laura and told her that he was no longer going to be nice to her, and he started threatening her. Now, as I've just said, stalking someone is not being nice. Yes, okay, he wasn't aggressive with her at first or sort of violent, but stalking is not nice. It's not friendly. It's not something anybody wants, and it's frightening. There's somebody there all the time watching you. No matter what you do, you can't get away from him. You move house, you change your number, he's there again. No, it's not okay. So how he thought that that was being nice, I don't know. In spring of 1986, Richard, of course, was still stalking Laura. Co-workers knew about it, and there were reports that came out that they had tried to speak to him. He would get really angry and he'd threaten them with his large gun collection. And he'd also made other threats against other employees too. Due to poor performance, ESL decided to terminate his employment. He'd worked for them for 9 years at this point. But it wasn't just due to poor performance. As soon as he sort of started stalking Laura, his work began to fizzle and wasn't as good as for the poor performance. But he was harassing Laura and obviously stalking her. He was totally forlorn and he didn't. He was threatening other employees, and so as a company, they couldn't have their staff members in danger. They have a duty to protect them. So he was exhibiting this stalk behavior, and they had to terminate him because they had to protect everyone. The problem was that yes, okay, he was now not in work, so he wasn't around Laura all the time in that sense, but that just gave him more time to stalk Laura because now he was unemployed. And what else would he do with his time apart from go and watch her do whatever he wanted to watch her do? So over the next few months, he would just stalk her all of the time, full time. Like that was his full time job now. He was increasing in his persistence, and he just had, as I said, all the time in the world that he wanted to delve into this obsession. And in his eyes, he actually had more time to now try and win her over, which is basically what he did for the next several months. In the summer of 1986, he actually got a new girlfriend called Mei Cheng. They got engaged, but even that didn't stop him from his obsession with Laura, which how that made his fiance feel, obviously, it probably was not good. He would write to her and become increasingly more threatening and increasingly more violent. In one letter in November 1987, he wrote, "You cost me $40,000 in empty taxes that I can't pay and a foreclosure, yet I still like you. Why do you want to find out how far I'll go?" He ended the letter with, "I absolutely will not be pushed around, and I'm beginning to get tired of being nice." In another letter he wrote to her, he said that he didn't want to kill her because he wanted her to have to live with the consequences of not responding to his romantic gestures. Which, seriously, Richard, she didn't like you in that way. You cannot force feelings on someone. They either happen or they don't. And in this case, they didn't for her. She was nice about it, and you were just, I don't know, you just lost the plot. Richard did manage to get another job in Covalent Systems Corporation in Sunnyvale, but even though he now had a job to occupy his time and he wasn't around Laura all the time, it still didn't decrease his stalking of her. Yes, it did in the sense that he couldn't do it all the time like he was doing, but he just was still so obsessed with her. In January of 1988, Laura went out to a car to find a package on a windscreen. Inside it was a copy of a house key along with a note. It was from Richard, and it was pretty much telling her that he could get her wherever she was, which is obviously frightening, and it must have terrified her. He literally managed to get hold of her house key. It's just awful and insane how resourceful he was. How did he manage to get all of these things? I know it was the 80s and maybe it was a bit more lax then, but still. She was terrified at this point. She didn't have a clue what else to do, and she felt like she was stuck, and so she went to go and get a temporary restraining order against Richard because what else could she do? It was granted on the 2nd of February in 1988, and he wasn't allowed within 300 feet of her, or he wasn't allowed to contact her whatsoever. A court date was set on the 17th, As I said, it was temporary, this restraining order, so this court date was to try and make it permanent. Now, after hearing about this restraining order, Richard, from what I can only presume, was furious or desperate, and he just literally snapped. He went off the deep end and he went and bought a shotgun and a lot of various other weapons and ammo. Now, he boasted about his gun collection at home. He didn't actually use any of them. He went and bought new ones in what he was about to do. And he spends around $2,000 on it all. Apparently, when you had a restraining order against you, you could still buy guns and ammo and things like that. But I do believe that the laws have since changed. I'm also just going to add something in here, which personally I found just unbelievable. He actually, when he finds out about the restraining order, so what does he do? He rings his solicitor and he takes Laura out of his will. So, yes, he had literally put the woman that he'd been stalking for years into his will. He was just insane. She didn't want anything to do with him, and he full on goes and puts her in his will. Just wow. On the 9th of February in 1988, Richard goes to Laura's attorney's office and he left a package there for him which he claimed was proof that he and Laura was in a relationship. He claimed that they were photographs taken while they were together, whilst they were on a date. It also had Laura's garage door opener in it, which probably stolen. It had these hotel receipts and credit card receipts, which he said proved that they were together, and her solicitor looked at all this evidence and basically dismissed the entire lot, saying that it was just utter fabrication and it ever happening. Which, of course, it was. Laura didn't have a relationship with him. It was all in his head. Then, on the 16th of February, the day before the court date to make this restraining order permanent was due to happen, Richard rents out a motorhome and he drives it to ESL, where, of course, Laura still worked at the time. He would later say that he sat there waiting for Laura to leave, waiting to catch her on her own to try and convince her to drop this restraining order. And his plan was that if she wouldn't do, he was going to kill himself. But this is so far from what he actually did. So this motorhome that he brought, he actually turned it into some sort of military arsenal with all the weapons that he purchased from the store, all of the ammo, loads of gear, all shovels.
The normal law, because the law is on. Also, I mean, that's totally funny. So if you think about every year for at least fines, they're going to work and go to recover. But the real motive is the motive is huge. Whatever you said, no. Those things spotted me, so big smile. Oh, man, let's go. My flying fuck in the air. No, you get younger every year. Wow, you. What did you do with yourself? Little juice with them or rest? No, just a little sunlight, sleep, and sunscreen. How's Maury? He's great. I was talking to people taking my friend. What's he doing? Give your name. My it's not hard. It is. My name is Harvey. It's Avery, and she's our very talented nurse practitioner. It's here. My patients, they pay $2 and they expect these kind of patients.
He had tons of ammo, tons of guns, and he was just ready for a battle. At 3 p.m., he loaded it all up, and as I've said, there were a lot of guns. A semi-automatic gun, a pump-action shotgun. He believed there were like 4 or 5 other guns that he took with him. He also took a smoke bomb and a buck knife. When he got there, he had this military outfit on. He had a bulletproof vest, scarf over his head with earplugs and leather gloves on. He loaded himself up with several guns, including including 12-gauge Barnelli Riot semi-shotgun, a Ruger M77 .22 250 rifle with the scope, and as I said, 4 or 5 more guns which he actually had on his person. So he had all of these guns and he was going into that building. He had around about 1,000 rounds of ammunition, and once he got himself loaded up, he jumps out of the motorhome and he is in the canopy of ESL. He begins heading towards the building, and that is where he shoots his first victim, Laura Kane, as he was heading towards the building. As he got closer, he just began shooting people, anyone that was in his path. He shot through a glass security door at the front, and that is how he got in the building. And once he was inside, he headed up to Laura's office, shooting anyone he could in his path. Arriving there, he opened the door, but Laura slammed it back in his face, and he shot through the door, but he actually missed. Laura locks the door in an attempt to try and protect herself, but he's got a gun. He just shoots through the lock, barges through the door, and shoots her pretty close range with the shotgun in her left shoulder. Now, as you can imagine, a shotgun in a shoulder is going to obliterate it. That's what it did. It shattered her sort of shoulder, and it also punctured up one of her lungs. Laura collapsed and fell unconscious. I guess when he sees her on the floor not moving, he probably thinks that she's dead, and so he then moves on. He was now looking to get anyone he could. He was literally looking under desks for people that may have been harmed, and he would shoot everywhere, and literally one person actually got shot through a wall, so he's just randomly and one come through the wall and hit someone. Police were called and SWAT team arrived and snipers were arranged to get a shot on Richard, but he kept moving from room to room and they couldn't get a clear shot on him. A hostage negotiator did manage to get through to Richard, and they talked on and off over the 5-hour siege. I will play a snippet of the clip. It's just really to show how unremorseful he sounded. He just sounds completely normal, completely fine, not like he's just shot up and is holding hostage an entire building.
Yeah, we heard this. This place.
Laura managed to regain consciousness and she contacted the police. She went on to hide the people that were hiding inside the building, and the police did manage to aid Laura and the other hostages after the 5 hours because they actually managed to get Richard to come out. How, you may ask? How are they getting this guy who is completely loaded up with guns, complete rampage, after 5 hours to come out of this building? Well, he got hungry. He finally surrendered after asking the police for a sandwich and catering. They, of course, went to get it for him, and he came out to collect it, and then he was arrested. That day, Richard did murder 7 people, and 4 more people were wounded. Here is a list of his victims' names that unfortunately lost their lives that day. Lawrence J. Keynes, he was 46. Wayne Buddy Williams Jr., he was 20. Joseph Lawrence Silver, 43, Glenda Moritz, 27, Ronald Stedman, 26, and Helen Lampada, 49. And the 4 victims that he injured were, of course, Laura Black, Gregory Scott, Richard Townsley, and Patty Marcotte. In total, the police concluded that Richard actually fired a total of 98 shots. 98 shots. This seemingly previous normal guy who had no warnings of anything, no indication of any violence until Laura came along. Just crazy. Laura was taken to hospital where she was treated for her injuries, and she was actually released 19 days later. Imagine how terrified these people must have been in this building, with this shooter going around just shooting everyone, and how scared Laura was when she woke up. She survived his attack, and she probably was petrified that he was going to come back to finish off the job. And the poor people that lost their lives. Just how many lives were actually affected by this one man? It's just heartbreaking. Richard would write another letter to Laura whilst he was in jail, basically telling her that she'd won. Like it was some sort of game for him. No, she hadn't won. Yes, she was free of him. Luckily, she survived his attack, but she had to recover and live with what he did to her. And she had to live knowing that 7 lives were destroyed that day, 7 families were destroyed that day, and they had to live without the person that they loved. There's just no winning in it. I don't know what he was thinking. I don't know what he's thinking through all of it, but just inexplicable. Richard had admitted killing the 7 people, but he pled not guilty because he claimed that he never actually planned to kill anyone that day. He was only aiming to get Laura's attention or to kill himself in front of her. Which, of course, why do you need all the bullets, Richard? Why do you need all that ammo if you're just going to go and kill yourself in front of her?
It's Robert,
It
you
just
know,
doesn't make any sense whatsoever. His attorney claimed that he was never a violent man before and he never had a criminal record, which he didn't. But obviously his obsession with Laura, of course. And that this obsession with her clouded his judgment. He said Richard would never likely kill him. But that doesn't... I don't understand that personally because he literally snapped over seeing a woman one time and becoming completely obsessed with her, and it escalated over the years, and it ended in a mass murder, basically. How can you promise that he's never going to do that again, that he's never going to see another woman and just become so obsessed with her that he does something like that again? You can't. You just can't do that. The prosecution, however, had every case of stalking all documented down that he'd done to Laura. They had all the letters that he'd sent to her. They found purchases of the guns and the ammunition. And they had evidence that this attack took a lot of planning and that it was premeditated, as I said. On the 21st of October in 1991, Richard was actually found guilty of 7 counts of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to death on the 17th of January in 1992. There have been several appeals since, however, Richard still remains on death row. Personally, I'm really glad that he did come out of the building. I know he killed 7 people, which is horrific, and that loss of life is absolutely heartbreaking, but he could have killed so many more too. So the fact that he came out because he was hungry is just a godsend, really, because as I said, he just could have done so much more damage, and that is something to be thankful of in the wake of such tragedy. I'm also happy to see that Laura survived because she had suffered for 4 years of him stalking and threatening her, and she literally took a shot point blank to the shoulder from a shotgun where the shells just disperse and rip you apart. And she survived. She managed to get a chance to move away from the insanity of all that. I know, obviously, it would traumatize her and weigh heavily on her. And my heart really does go out to the victims and all the families and everyone that was involved in this tragic case when a seemingly normal man callously stole their lives away from them. Laura went on to say that Richard was frighteningly normal. He was irritating because he wouldn't stop annoying her, but he didn't seem like a bad person until he snapped, which is actually a really scary thought when you think about it. But yeah, that's the end of the case. If you have any suggestions you'd like me to look into, let me know and I'll look into them for you. Give me a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for similar content. Anyway, guys, that's all I have today on the case of Laura Black and the Sunnyvale Spring murders. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.
As a kid, I wanted to be a assistant manager. They're police for that. You follow us, Dan. What's your team record?
Hey Alex, I haven't got any pregnant since we started.
Okay, good, thanks.
Like I was surprised that I don't know if it's pregnant in my time. So just sympathetic. I must have. One thing that really was funny
Nice to meet you.
oh, all today. What kinds of buttons? Well, cut it.
Okay, well, you have fun. You might want that. I suppose to make sure it's not a damage issue. I'm going to prescribe you the CBD pump. It's all that.
What was the deal?
Redness will go down, but unfortunately, that's damage to the tissue, and you are going to experience this thing. That line maybe is rapid.
Can't we do that now? A skin graft or something? No, it's not. Skin graft is not too difficult.
Yes.
Oh. Now. Obviously, yes, and it's frightening. You look from that, understand? My duty is to the patient. As far as I'm concerned, hopefully they're doing more than I do not like to do. What?
Hello everyone, hope you're all doing well. Now brace yourself for today's case because it is a really frustrating one. I genuinely believe that this could have been prevented. The man at the centre of this case was delusional and very, very dangerous. He was creepy and he would make your skin crawl. So let's meet him, shall we? Richard Wade Farley was born July 25th, 1948 at Lackland Air Force Base, Texas. His father was an aircraft mechanic in the Air Force and his mother was a housewife. Richard was the eldest of 6 children. The family moved around a lot before settling in Petaluma, California, when Richard was 8 years old. Richard's mother said it was a loving household. It wasn't an overly affectionate one, but they were a close knit family. And Richard was a shy, quiet, well behaved little boy. He didn't demand a lot of attention from his parents and was just quite happy going about his business doing usual kid stuff. When Richard was in high school, he was particularly interested in maths and chemistry. He was very studious. He took his studies very seriously. He never got involved in drugs or alcohol or anything like that. He just wasn't interested in it. Instead, he enjoyed playing chess, baking, and doing photography. He graduated 61st out of 520 high school students. And other than a bit of rough and tumble with his brothers, he was never a violent boy. He was very well mannered and well behaved. He was an all round good kid. Richard graduated from high school in 1966 and joined the Santa Rosa Community College, but a year later he dropped out and decided to join the US Navy. Richard seemed to excel in the Navy. He graduated first out of his class of 6 at the Naval Submarine School. He stayed at the Navy for 10 years until he decided to leave, at which point he received an honourable discharge. After this, he trained to be a cryptologic technician, which is someone who maintains the electronic equipment. I've never heard of that before. I don't even know if I'm saying it right. Cryptologic technician. Cryptologic technician. Richard qualified for top secret security clearance in that role. He had access to the highest classified information, and anyone in that role had to be investigated as standard every 5 years. It was so high level. Richard later left that job in 1977 and moved to San Jose, where he was employed by a company called ESL as a software technician. ESL, or the Electromagnetic Systems Laboratory, was a defense contractor founded in 1964 in Sunnyvale, California. It dealt with software design, systems analysis, and hardware development for the strategic reconnaissance marketplace, which would be supplied to the US military. It doesn't exist in the same way today because it was bought out by the Northrop Grumman Corporation in 2002, but back then it was really thriving and it sounds like it was a fascinating place to work. The kind of work that Richard was doing was working on equipment that would feed the US military information about enemy forces, what they were doing, and how strong they were. And high level work, and Richard was very good at it. In terms of Richard's interaction with his colleagues, there seems to be very varying reports of the kind of person they found him to be. Some people would say he was just a good guy, he was good to work with and good company, whereas other people said he was arrogant and would brag all the time to the point where he would actually bore them with it. He would brag about how many guns he had and how good he was at using them. But on the whole, most colleagues would say he was an okay guy. That's until 1984, when Richard started a chain of events that would change a lot of people's lives forever, but it would bring about a much needed vital change in US law. In 1984, Richard was at a company function with ESL when he was introduced to a woman called Laura Black. Laura was a very pretty, very bright electrical engineer in her early 20s. For Laura, he was just another colleague she'd been introduced to, but for Richard, it was a life changing moment. He was immediately besotted with her. He said it was her smile, which sounds sweet, but Richard is not someone whose interest you'd want to attract. Richard asked Laura on a date, but she politely declined. She wasn't interested in Richard in that way. She wasn't attracted to him. But that didn't deter Richard. He just thought she was playing hard to get. He started to leave little gifts on her desk, like freshly baked bread and little cards and things, and she still continued to politely decline him, but that didn't stop him. He wasn't taking no for an answer. So then he started calling her desk phone at work every few hours, which Laura tolerated for a while. She must have mentioned in one of those conversations that she was joining an aerobics class that night, and when she turned up that evening, there Richard was. He'd also joined the class. Richard's phone calls to Laura became so frequent that she had to make her number unlisted. I think at this point I'd be getting pretty worried about this guy, but it gets a lot worse. When Laura realised that Richard was either unwilling or unable to accept that she'd rejected him, she decided to stop communicating with him altogether. Aside from if she saw him around, she'd be cordial. The problem with that is, in Richard's mind, her being cordial was a green light. It was still not technically a no, so he continued. Richard took pleasure in making things really difficult for Laura. Even if she communicated with him in a negative way, that was still a good thing to him. It was still a green light because at the end of the day, she was still communicating with him. A prime example of this is on one occasion, Richard left a voicemail on Laura's phone arranging a date. In the voicemail, he said, "If you don't want to go on a date, give me a call back. But if you don't reply to this voicemail, I'll assume the date is on." What he's doing here is he's making sure he gets communication with Laura regardless. She has to ring him to say that she doesn't want to go on the date. If she ignores him, he's going to turn up assuming that it's on. So either way, he wins. And of course, because Laura didn't call Richard back, he turned up at her door for the date. And when she sent him away, he said she was playing games. If you're wondering how Richard managed to get Laura's home address, it's because he contacted the HR department within ESL and they agreed to hand over her home address and home telephone number. There's no way it should have been that easy. He then managed to convince the facilities department at ESL to make a copy of her desk key and hand that over to him too. So then he rifled through all of Laura's drawers. For a high-level security company, there's no way it should have been that easy for him to access this kind of information. Now Richard had Laura's address, he was able to write to her, and he did. He wrote to her at least twice a week. He would frequently drive past the house, and she said at any point during the day, she'd look out of the window and see him sat in his car outside, just watching the house. On one occasion, Richard sat for hours and tried different code combinations on Laura's garage door to try to gain entry. On another occasion, he tried to rent the apartment next door to hers, which then meant that she had to move. Between 1985 and 1988, Laura had to move 3 times to get away from Richard, and each time he found out where she lived and he would start the whole process again. From 1984 to 1988, Laura received over 200 letters from Richard. She even received 2 letters while she was visiting her parents' home. I think it goes without saying, she never told Richard where her parents lived. This guy makes my skin crawl. She must have been terrified. Word of Richard's terrifying behaviour got round at work, and his colleagues tried to step in. They tried to have a chat with him and say, "You've taken it too far now, you need to back off." But Richard didn't want to hear it, and whenever they did raise it with him, he just got nasty. So in 1985, Laura ended up going to the HR department and asking them to help her with this. I think I'd be saying more than that to the HR department, given that they are the reason he had her address in the first place. So HR met with Richard and basically told him to stop. He also told him he needed to attend counselling sessions. Richard reluctantly agreed, but a few months later he was up to his old tricks again, so they had to call him in again. A month after that, they had to call him in again, and each time he would receive a written warning. Now, if the only deterrent is another written warning, I'm not surprised Richard didn't stop. In January 1986, Richard has another meeting with HR, and at this point he's really angry. He tells HR he's sick of them telling him what to do, and he's sick of Laura creating all of these problems for him. He's so angry that he sits outside of Laura's apartment and waits for her to come out, and when she does, he confronts her. Richard tells Laura that he's not going to be asking her to do things anymore, he's going to be telling her. He reminds her that he has guns and he's very good at using them. Those threats continued over the weekend as he sent her a letter. He writes in the letter that whilst he won't kill her, he does have a whole range of other options, each one getting worse and worse. Again, he says she shouldn't push him because he owns guns and knows how to use them. He warned her that soon he was going to crack under the pressure and run amok, destroying everything in his path until the police catch him and kill him. A month after he sends this letter, Richard, who is still employed with ESL, goes to an HR manager and says that she has no right getting involved in his relationship. She reminds him that she does have a right because sexual harassment is illegal, and if he continues this behaviour, he'll be sacked. I can't believe that at this point they're still saying, if you continue this behaviour. Has he not done enough by this point to not only be sacked but be arrested? Richard replied that if she fired him, he'd have nothing to live for. And then he gave her the same threat that he gave to Laura, that he had guns and he knew how to use them. The HR manager said, "Are you saying you'll kill me?" And Richard replied, "Yes, I am, and not just you. I'll take others down with me." Richard continued to harass and torment Laura, and 3 months after he had that discussion with the HR manager where he threatened to kill her and various other people, he was finally sacked from ESL after a decade of working there. Now, I know this was the 80s, but it wasn't the Stone Age. How did this guy manage to keep his job for this long? Not only that, but how was he not arrested? He threatened to kill multiple people, and he still had a job right up until this point. I don't think it'll surprise you to learn that firing Richard didn't make him go away. It just intensified his behaviour. His personal life spiralled. He lost his car, he lost his house, he owed $20,000 in taxes. And he also got more vicious in his letters to Laura, and he'd be seen still hanging around the ESL car park. Weird side note is during this period, Richard actually got a girlfriend. She was called Mei Chang, and she was a student at the San Jose State University. But even though he got a girlfriend, that didn't stop him stalking Laura. He got worse, actually. He wrote to Laura again in July 1987 saying, "I don't think you realised how far I'm willing to go to hurt you if I'm forced to." And what he meant by forced to was, don't even think about getting a restraining order. And the letters just kept on coming for months after that until November 1987 when he wrote, "You cost me a job, thousands of dollars in taxes I can't pay, and a foreclosure, all because you think I'm a joke and refuse to listen or understand that I'm gravely serious. Yet I still like you. Why do you want to find out how far I'll go? I absolutely will not be pushed around, and I'm beginning to get tired of being nice." Being nice. He said he didn't want her dead, but he wanted her to have to live with the consequences of having rejected him. Then a few months after that, in January, Richard left a note on Laura's car. But it wasn't the note that was the chilling part, it was what was with it. It was a copy of Laura's apartment key. She must have been absolutely terrified. It was at this point that she decided to get an attorney. On February 8, 1988, Laura was granted a temporary restraining order. Richard was to stay away from her and to not contact her. When Richard found out about this, it tipped him over the edge. He was furious, and he immediately started to plot his revenge. He bought $2,000 worth of guns and ammunition, and he rang his solicitor and had Laura taken off his will. Yes, she was in his will. He also attempted to contact Laura's attorney, and he left a parcel with them, and he said inside the parcel was proof that they'd been having a relationship this whole time. Inside of it were things like dinner receipts and phone call recordings and photos of Laura, but of course they were all things that he'd done without her consent. It was just part of his fantasy life. Knowing that the court date for making the restraining order permanent was February 17, 1988, Richard put his plan into action on February 16th. Just some of the weapons that Richard had bought a week prior was a semi-automatic shotgun, a rifle, 2 revolvers and 2 pistols. Richard drove to the ESL offices in a rented motorhome. He had a bandolier slung over his shoulder. A bandolier is like a belt with pockets on that holds ammunition. He also had a scarf around his head and black leather gloves on. He sat in the motorhome for a while, wondering whether he should do this, but he decided he would because he didn't want Laura to think he was a wimp. So he took a knife into his belt, took a smoke bomb and a gasoline container, and at 3 p.m. started walking towards the ESL offices. Richard is walking towards the ESL offices, but he doesn't even get into the building before he encounters his first victim, who just happens to be stood in front of him. He shoots him dead, and then everyone else starts ducking for cover, and he makes his way further towards the building. Richard manages to get into the building by shooting straight through an electronic security lock, which allows him to get in through the side door. As he enters the building, he shoots his next 2 victims, a man on the first floor who sat behind his desk, and another person on the landing of the stairs on the second floor. He also shoots any equipment he can find as he's walking through. It seems that those people that Richard shot as he was walking through were people who he just happened to encounter. They got in his way as he was making his way through the building looking for Laura. Then he reaches Laura's office, which is on the second floor. She manages to slam the door in front of him before he gets there, but that doesn't stop him.
No.
He shoots through the lock and makes his way in. His first shot misses Laura, but his second one hits her. It hits her in the shoulder and she falls to the floor and passes out. Satisfied that he's done sufficient damage to Laura, he leaves her office and then he starts looking for other people. He finds people hidden under desks and he shoots them. Other people hearing the shots throughout the building start to run for cover and they jump out of windows to try to get to safety. The police have been called by now and the SWAT team arrive on the scene. Snipers are positioned around the building, but Richard's too clever for that. He keeps moving from office to office so the snipers can't get a clear shot of him. However, Richard finally settles in a second floor computer room and he rings through to the security office. The security office put him through to the police negotiator. Richard tells the negotiator that he originally only went to ESL to damage their property. He blamed them after they fired him for him losing his house, his car, and being in debt. He said he only started shooting people when they tried to stop him. But that doesn't add up because the negotiator later asked him if he enjoyed hunting, and he said no, it's not sporting to shoot animals, I'd rather shoot people. He said he was not sorry that he'd shot his victims. He said he was only sorry that he'd shot Laura because he wanted to make sure that she survived so that she could remember this day and regret ever rejecting him. He also said he was sorry that the person who had fired him was not present that day. He says to the negotiator, I'm not crazy. I know I will die as a result of this. But what brought Richard's 5-hour siege to an end was the fact that he was hungry. He wanted a sandwich and a soda. Richard surrendered to the SWAT team in exchange for food and drink. He said that the police were allowed to come in and release any hostages who were still hiding. After he was taken in, the ESL spokeswoman Edie Cartwright Richard appeared so suddenly with so much weaponry that the company's locks and other security procedures were useless. Richard threatened he would do this on multiple occasions to many different ESL employees. What is so sudden about that? Richard Farley killed 7 people that day, all ESL employees, and he injured 4 more. He fired 98 rounds and the shooting lasted for 30 minutes. One piece of good news is that Laura Black was not killed that day. She had shoulder and spinal injuries, but she was taken to hospital and eventually she pulled through and survived. Richard was taken in and charged with 7 counts of capital murder, assault with a deadly weapon, second-degree burglary, and vandalism. Richard still, even after all of this, couldn't comprehend the seriousness of what he'd done. He said to another prisoner, since this is my first offence, I think they should be lenient on me. If I did it again, then fair enough, they should. In 1991, Richard Farley went to trial. He admitted to the killings but pleaded not guilty. He said this was not a premeditated attack. He said he only went to the ESL offices to get Laura's attention, to commit suicide in front of her as payback for rejecting him. He said he never planned to kill, he only shot objects in his way. He said he remembered looking up at the sky and thinking, what a lovely day to die. He said it was instinctive and reactive. He said he saw these people pop up and he would shoot. At the trial, Richard said he shot Laura because he wasn't expecting her to smile. He said, I haven't seen her smile in a long time. Now, I don't know whether it was in his head that she smiled or whether she actually did smile as a way of trying to calm him down. Richard's attorney said that Richard wasn't a violent man and he was just clouded by his obsession with Laura and he would likely never kill again. But of course the prosecution had years worth of evidence to present that showed Richard had premeditated this whole thing and that he was a very dangerous individual. They documented every step of the stalking, the letters that Richard sent to her over the years, the receipts for the ammunition and the guns, which proved that it was premeditated. He'd bought those guns a week before the shooting. On October 21st, 1991, Richard Farley, aged 43, was found guilty and convicted of all 7 counts of first-degree murder. And then on January 17th, 1992, he was sentenced to death. The San Jose Family Court Commissioner Lois Kittle, who made the original temporary restraining order against Richard, then made it permanent the day after the shootings. She was in tears when she said, "This is a consciousness-raising incident. It shows that pieces of paper cannot stop bullets." Even whilst he was in prison, Richard managed to send Laura a letter. In the letter he said, "When I go to the gas chamber, I will smile for the cameras and you will know that you have won." Now that absolutely floored me. How many people can let this woman down? Her stalker, the man who tried to kill her, the man who did kill 7 other people, was still allowed to send her a letter. It's absolutely unbelievable. In 1989, Richard wrote a letter to his friend Tom Birch. In the letter he wrote, "I'm glad Laura's okay. I hope she her, she wouldn't be here today." The ESL building where the shootings took place was demolished around 2002. It was replaced with new buildings with new companies in them. I think that's a good thing because there's no physical reminder of the damage he did that day. Richard faced a death sentence. He argued that his trial was tainted by pre-trial publicity and other legal errors, but on July 2nd, 2009, the California Supreme Court rejected those arguments and denied his appeal. As of 2020, Richard Farley is still on death row in San Quentin prison. One positive thing to happen is that this case, as well as a few others, helped to bring about the USA's first anti-stalking laws in 1990. California were the first state to criminalize stalking, and every other state after that in the USA followed in their footsteps within the next 2 years. And as for Laura Black, well, there's not much information out there about her now, which I'm not surprised by. What we do know is that she went back to work for ESL for a while. On to have an amazing career, and she's now a managing director for a very high-profile company. She obviously didn't let this man ruin her life. She went on to do great things, and good for her. What a woman. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this case. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. If you did enjoy this video, please give me a like and subscribe. I've got a lot more videos planned and I'd love for you to stick around to see them. Have a great day and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.
But as I found myself staring into this depth, all of the fun really wandered. Simple, easy. Ken shows. There's Ken. Then we play by and in. But as I kept on, I said, this guy just go. And I was late.
Paramount Plus. Let's see. Let's see. Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, Paramount Plus. Netflix, Disney Plus, Netflix, Hulu.
Big expenses, meet your big financial friend, Experian. Your BFF can reveal surprising ways to help you save. That way, you're always ready for what's unexpected or whatever you're planning next. So achieving your financial goals becomes easier because you're one step closer to reaching them with your big financial friends. Experian.
Influences glory for you. Call to the comeback. I've been here for GM in 1991. You broke the book on 4-wheel drive. 84 years later. Some create trends. We create our own trail. Some live stream. We cross real. Some sort of smile with emotion. You smile for real. You call it a comeback. She is only one.
Do you take this woman and her USAA membership to have car insurance and home insurance, life insurance and banking from this day forward? I do. And do you take this man to share USAA membership to have all your insurance and banking in one spot, forsaking all others from this day forward? Thank you. I do too.
USA for the military community and their families.
Assistance, please. Guys, I have an unresponsive patient. What's going on?
I don't know. Found a season that's fun. Okay, we gotta move her. Let's check her incision sites. We're running through 1, 2, 3.
But she's been taking the antibiotics, damn it.
Emphasizing fasciitis. Okay, we gotta move fast and get her on this normal thing bolus. Antibiotics. I need vancomycin, loading dose, clindamycin, 608 hours, and I need a tissue culture.
What the hell is going on in here?
It's a sterilization issue. Wait in my office, please. I'll be with you in 5 minutes. Thank you. Avery, let's get that line in.
You have to understand. Vanna is the patient. She is shocked. For me, it's a relationship that's closer than family. So I would like to know exactly what is going on.
The tissue around her.
So this tissue removing this is not for your effective.
However, it's fine.
You have to be the tissue of question. It's just your respect is an integral part of who she is.
There are many different ways. Treatment, exposure, to be honest with you, anyone.
So we don't use anyone. We use all of them. Precision to movement, one layer to the time. Vacuum assisted closure to remove anything that's mixed.
To stop the spread.
Targeted contact, we have machines, there's a bacteria that's missed, but we short this. It also stimulates collagen, scar and toxin effect.
The tissue. Incredible size.
I can do it. I can. I'll go with the second one.
Beautiful.
Instead, vacuum. I'm so excited to go to court and do a little shopping.
You? Yeah. You want to come to the beach before lunch? You can surf. Oh,
I want to something. I do, but I also want to have gloves for everyone. Mine is up to the page to the cheap. That's the location. Drop it in. I'll see you soon. Excuse me.
So she's doing
It's just like, you're welcome to go to the doctor.
this is it.
Is this what you were waiting for? And then,
You know, really stuff. Learning a lesson, and you can't ever go back. You never unsee the thing you suddenly see. You know, excuses, but if you suddenly see, I don't know, it was never real. I was never in love with it. I was infatuated. It's always just part of this stupid pattern over and over. Women in positions of authority, she always gets comes back. And she promises us mentally, and I know better than to believe I do. Really with me this time.
Now, in my experience, people do change. Yeah. But it's rarely when you expect it.